Imagine stepping into a time machine, but instead of flashing lights and whirring gears, the door opens onto a world of colorless seas and trembling sands. You stand on the margin of an ancient shoreline. The air tastes different, heavier, warmer. A vast ocean stretches to the horizon. Panthalassa, an endless steel-blue blanket broken only by the silhouettes of far-off continents. Under the water, a silent revolution is unfolding. This is the Cambrian, the first act of the Paleozoic drama, a time between about 538.8 million and 486.85 million years ago. It lasts roughly 52 million years, but within that span, life on Earth rewrites its own rulebook. Now picture the continents not where they are today. Most land sits shivered into pieces clustered in the southern hemisphere. A gargantuan supercontinent, Gondwana, gathers like a slow-breathing beast near the South Pole, its margins restless with volcanic arcs and grinding tectonic teeth. To the north lies Laurentia, stretching along the equator, separated from Gondwana by the newborn Iapetus Ocean. Other smaller lands, Baltica, Siberia, Avalonia, the terrains with names that will later surface in maps and fossils, drift and tilt, collide and part like dancers in a continental waltz. These motions reshape ocean currents, stir climates, and crank open new habitats. In short, plate tectonics is the silent director of the Cambrian stage. The Cambrian is famous for two things: the explosion of animal diversity, the Cambrian Explosion, and an almost magical bounty of fossil sites that preserve the soft and the fragile, as if time had decided to press them gently into stone. These rare places, called Lagerstätten, hold creatures with soft guts, gilled mouths, spiny limbs, and peculiar body plans that look like someone mixed arthropods, worms, and alien designs in a prehistoric blender. The Burgess Shale, the Mauchian Shales, Sirius Passet, each is a frozen page from a book where evolution experiments with new chapters. But what triggered this biological fireworks show? It isn't a single neat cause. Instead, the Cambrian is a tapestry woven from environmental shifts, chemistry, and biological invention. Atmospheric oxygen rose from the lower levels of the earlier world, still far below modern levels, but climbing. Oceans responded in fits and starts. Pulses of oxygen reached deeper waters, sometimes expanding habitable zones on the seafloor. At other times, the seas turned murky and suffocating with pockets of anoxia, where hydrogen sulfide and low oxygen spelled doom for many animals. These swings were mirrored in the rocks as sudden changes in carbon and sulfur isotopes, the planet's own mood rings, signaling episodes where life boomed and where life faltered. Visualize the seafloor before the Cambrian, a carpet of microbial mats, shimmering green and brown, stitched by bacteria that held sediments together in a sticky embrace. Many Ediacaran organisms had adapted to living on those mats, a soft, quilted world. Then new behavior appears. Animals start burrowing. Tiny legs, bristles, and mouths begin to churn the sediment, turning solid carpets into stirred loam. This bioturbation is more than messy digging, it's ecosystem engineering. Burrowing oxygenates sediments, alters nutrient cycles, and breaks the ecological stronghold of the mat-dependent organisms. With these changes, new niches open and old ways of life collapse. The Ediacaran biota wanes. The stage belongs increasingly to mobile, armored, segmented, and shelled animals. And what a parade of weird and wonderful creatures it is. For many viewers, a word that conjures the Cambrian is trilobite. These multi-segmented, often beautifully ornamented arthropods become iconic. But trilobites were only part of the story. Arthropods more broadly dominate the seas, some with heavy armor, others with delicate limbs, many with appendages that indicate the beginning of complex motion and feeding strategies. Alongside them, sponges filter, archaeocyaths build reef-like structures, early mollusks crawl, brachiopods clench their bivalve shells, and echinoderms begin their strange radial experiments. Tiny shelly fossils enter the record, and soft-bodied animals, like the famed Hallucigenia and the bizarre Opabinia, hint at evolutionary sketches that are later refined into modern phyla. The Cambrian is also a time when skeletons become more common. The chemistry of seawater and biological pressures produce shells and hard parts. Calcium carbonate and early biomineralization appear more often. Why build armor or shells? Predation intensifies. With mobility and sensory sophistication rising, creatures begin to hunt and to hide. Armor provides protection, shells give structure and a surface for muscles. This evolutionary arms race shapes body plans, drives diversity, and inscribes a better fossil record, which is, in part, why we see the Cambrian explosion so vividly. More creatures had things that fossilize. But visibility does not mean uniform success. The Cambrian narrative is punctuated by setbacks and extinctions. Geological whispers record several extinction pulses, the first major trilobite die-off occurring between Series 2 and the Meolingian. Large igneous provinces, like the Kalkaringi eruptions, belched vast amounts of greenhouse gases and sulfur, pushing temperatures up, changing ocean chemistry, and flooding continental shelves with anoxic water. These crises smothered reefs, sank calcifying communities, and reset ecological playing fields. Yet extinction also clears space for new evolution. After a cull, survivors diversify again, sometimes into forms more complex or more resilient than before. Now let's travel through the Cambrian's internal divisions, not as dry labels but as episodes of drama. The early Cambrian, the Terranuvian, opens with a boundary defined by trace fossils, the excitable activity of small creatures leaving patterned tracks in the sediment. Treptichnus pedum, a burrow with branching patterns, becomes the worldwide signal that one era has ended and another begun. In these lowest strata, complex burrowing appears, tiny shelly fossils clack into the fossil record, and the pace of innovation quickens. This is where the first shimmering hints of modern animal architecture emerge. Following this dawn, Cambrian Series 2 deepens the palette. Trilobites make their more widespread debut in some regions, archaeocyaths build patch reefs, and the seas teem with novel body plans. Yet global correlation is tricky here. Many groups are geographically restricted, so scientists hunt for markers to line up rocks from Australia, China, Laurentia, and elsewhere, like pages in a fossil atlas. As the curtain rises to the Middle Cambrian, the Meolingian, the Burgess Shale and its global cousins gift the world with exquisite snapshots of soft-bodied life. Here we find the bewildering Opabinia, with its 5 eyes and hose-like proboscis, Hallucigenia, once upside down in the museum drawers and now restored to its spiky glory, and a cast of early arthropods and worms that make it clear the experiment of body plans was in full swing. The Middle Cambrian also bears the scars of earlier extinctions. Some trilobite groups vanish, others radiate, and global geochemistry continues to oscillate, driven by tectonics and the episodic release of volcanic gases. The Late Cambrian, the Furongian, heads toward a boundary that will usher in the Ordovician. Global markers, the appearance of diagnostic conodonts and shifts in carbon isotopes, give geologists fixed points in deep time. Yet the Late Cambrian is not a sedentary finish. It hosts further abiotic stress and biotic turnover. Biodiversity dips and rebounds. The seas, once teeming with experimental life forms, show signs of consolidation. Some lineages expand, others disappear, and the ecological networks become more complex and interwoven. Beyond animals, the Cambrian biosphere includes algae and microbial communities that continue older traditions. Macroalgae drift and carpets of microbes hug shallow flats. On land, life remains sparse. No clear forests, no broadleaf carpets. Microbial mats cling to beaches and tidal areas. Perhaps simple fungi and microbial partners begin to explore soils, but the great colonization of land lies in a future chapter. Molecular clocks hint that green plants and even some arthropods might have peered onto land in tentative, barely recorded steps, but the fossil evidence for true terrestrial ecosystems waits for the Ordovician. Climate in this age is a story of warmth, greenhouse conditions, and regional quirks. The Cambrian world overall is warmer than today. Sea surface temperatures in tropical regions may have climbed into the upper 20s or even into the 30s Celsius. Atmospheric oxygen remains lower than modern levels, sometimes surprisingly low, and the oceans respond. Low oxygen and elevated nutrient inputs create pockets of anoxia that wax and wane. When anoxia expands, life struggles. When oxygenated pulses sweep in, biodiversification follows. These rhythmic shifts leave their signatures in sedimentary rocks and isotopic swings, which scientists read like letters from the past. Geochemistry becomes an important narrator here. Carbon and sulfur isotope excursions, pulses of strontium change, and fluctuations in magnesium-calcium ratios all reveal shifts in weathering rates, volcanic activity, sea level, and organic burial. For example, The Steptoe positive carbon isotope excursion, SPACE, in the late Cambrian marks a time when organic carbon burial surged, possibly tied to changes in ocean circulation or productivity. Other excursions, the BASE, CARE, and ROIS, punctuate the Cambrian with episodes of change, each associated with ecological consequences. Even impacts leave their fingerprints. Several meteorite strikes occurred around Cambrian times. Craters in Estonia, Norway, Canada, Australia, Lithuania, and North Dakota remind us that extraterrestrial forces played a background role. These impacts varied in size and effect. Some shook local ecosystems, others had more regional influence. They are part of the mosaic of stressors and opportunities in Earth's theater. If the Cambrian teaches us one compassionate lesson, it is that change is rarely simple. Evolution is messy, creative, and often cruel. New behaviors, burrowing, predation, mobility, reshape landscapes and ecosystems. Tectonics and volcanism alter climate and chemistry. Pulses of oxygen and anoxia alternately constrict and expand life's possibilities. Yet through these fluctuations, life grows more complex. Experimentation yields winners, and the blueprint of modern animal life emerges. So what remains in the rocks for us today? Exceptional fossil beds, those famed Lagerstätten, are the Cambrian's postcards to the future. There, soft tissues were replaced by minerals in fine-grained clays, preserving limbs, gut tracts, eyes, and delicate appendages. These snapshots let us reconstruct whole communities, not just shelly fragments. They allow us to see behavior, feeding traces, burrows, resting impressions, and to imagine the day-to-day lives of creatures that otherwise would exist only as enigmatic shapes. As you step back from that imagined shoreline and let the deep time settle, notice how familiar and how strange the Cambrian feels. It is our deep past and our evolutionary starting gate, the rise of complex animals, the birth of predation and armor, the first experiments with skeletons, and the early stirrings of ecosystems that would, in time, lead to reefs, forests, and eventually us. It reminds us that Earth's history is a long, creative process of trial and error, driven by geology, chemistry, and insatiable biological imagination. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the sea again. A worm weaving a burrow, a trilobite crawling, a swarm of tiny arthropods flicking feathery limbs, a filter-feeding sponge standing silent. Around them the ocean breathes, sometimes shallow and oxygen-rich, sometimes heavy with sulfurous deep water pressing up onto the shelves. Volcanoes grumble on distant coasts, continents drift, collide, and open new seaways. In that dynamic, complicated stage, life doesn't merely survive, it invents persistently and wildly. The Cambrian is not just an era of fossils, it is a story of beginnings. Beginnings of body plans, of ecological roles, of deep-time drama that shapes everything that follows. Because of it, the world gains complexity, and over the next hundreds of millions of years, that complexity multiplies. The Cambrian's legacy is both the fossilized forms we admire in museums and the invisible rules, competition, predation, habitat engineering, that govern life still today. Finally, carry this thought forward. When you next hold a shell or watch a crab scuttle across a tide pool, remember that those simple acts are echoes of innovations that began in the Cambrian's workshop. Evolution's experiments from 500 million years ago ripple into the present. We are living in a world authored by deep time, tectonics, chemistry, and the restless inventive force of life. The Cambrian was an opening chorus, loud, perplexing, and endlessly creative, and its music still plays beneath the surface of every living thing. Music swells briefly, then fades to a contemplative close.